In this eye-opening interview, former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton exposes Trump's erratic foreign policy, his misconceptions about Putin, and the troubling implications for Ukraine.
Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you again today.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be with you.
So, a lot's been happening recently. Donald Trump took office less than 2 months ago, and already he's rushing to end the war in Ukraine. Many people say, though, it's on the terms that Russia would prefer. What do you make of all that's been happening?
Well, I think people should understand Trump is really an aberration in American political life. Obviously, he's president, so it makes a big difference, but he has no philosophy. He has no national security grand strategy. He doesn't do policy as we conventionally understand that term. With him, everything is transactional, episodic, ad hoc, and seen through the prism of what benefits Donald Trump. So he has said many times he sees foreign policy as being equivalent to the relations between the heads of two governments. So if he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, he thinks the U.S. has good relations with Russia. Now, I'm not dismissing the role of personal relations in international affairs. It obviously has a place, but that's not how Putin sees things. He has a pretty clear-eyed view of what he thinks Russia's national interest is, and he thinks he can manipulate Donald Trump. Trump thinks they're friends. Putin sees Trump as an easy mark. Trump just doesn't get it. Now, conversely, if Trump has bad relations with a foreign head of state, then he thinks the U.S. has bad relations with the country. And unfortunately for Ukraine, because of the famous perfect phone call between Trump and Zelensky in the summer of 2019 that led to Trump's first impeachment, I think he's never had a good relationship with Zelensky, notwithstanding Zelensky's extensive efforts to try and overcome it. And I think that is part of what we've seen play out over the past several weeks. So it is a fact that Trump has basically reversed the U.S. position, saying even before negotiations begin, there will not be a full restoration of sovereignty and territorial integrity, no NATO membership, no NATO security guarantees, no U.S. security guarantees. You know, these are all Kremlin positions. The only unhappiness in Moscow these days is that they didn't ask for more because they might have gotten it. So it's a hard place to be. I do think that the debacle in the Oval Office was a manifestation that Trump just doesn't like Zelensky, and now I think we're seeing an effort by Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz to try and bridge this over and get things back on an even keel. And I think the agreement in Jeddah, not necessarily to Ukraine's advantage, but clearly necessary to get a resumption of U.S. military and intelligence assistance. 30-day ceasefire, we'll see if the Kremlin agrees to it, but I understand the priority that Kyiv had in the restoration of the assistance, and they were willing to pay the price of agreeing to a ceasefire.
So, you worked directly with President Trump in his first term. What's your takeaway? What does he actually feel himself about Ukraine or about Russia or about Vladimir Putin? A lot of people say that he's been going out of his way to help Russia out. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, as I say, he thinks he's friends with Putin. So your friends always tell you the truth, right? Just like he said in Helsinki that he believed Putin that and disagreed with American intelligence on Russia's role in the 2016 election. Stunning to Americans that he would say that. But you know, do you trust your friends or do you trust the deep state? That's the that's the Trump mentality. Um, I just think that it's important to try and work with Trump on that understanding uh, that it's entirely personal, that he doesn't conceptualize foreign policy. There's no strategy behind it. His supporters say, you know, he plays this complex game of three-dimensional chess. No, he doesn't. He plays regular chess one move at a time, and that's all, one move at a time. So, you know, there are theories that he was recruited by the Russians years ago. Uh, I don't see any evidence of it. I think his behavior is explainable, unfortunately, in simpler ways. And just for credibility in the American political debate, people should understand that the way I've described Trump is the way he operates on a day-to-day basis. There's no bigger picture. There's no hidden agenda. He just doesn't think that way. When he ran the Trump Organization in business, I was told he would never set up a daily schedule. He'd come into the office every day and say, well, what's going to happen today? Now, that may work in real estate in Manhattan. It doesn't work internationally, but in many respects, Trump is still that same person.
That's fascinating. So, when you worked with him, was he open to new ideas? When he would meet with, let's say, national security advisors or the CIA, was he open to what they were saying? Or did he have pretty strong preconceived notions of what he was going to do and he would act on them or cherry pick information to support the arguments he already had?
Well, it varied from issue to issue. In many cases, he knew nothing about a particular aspect of international affairs. He had no experience. He didn't know much about how the U.S. government operated or what its capabilities were. He didn't particularly care. He wasn't interested in learning, and so he could move from one position to another with total flexibility because he had nothing invested in the position he had taken earlier in the day since he hadn't thought it through. I mean, there are some things that he's always talked about. He likes low interest rates in the domestic economy. I think everybody in real estate likes low interest rates. He would just like them permanently. He obviously likes tariffs. That's why we're in the nascent trade war that we're in now. But in international affairs, other than his affinity for particular foreign leaders, he had no fixed points of reference, and so sure he could adopt ideas and but change them very shortly thereafter. I said in my book that of the thousands of decisions that he made in his first term, you could take them all, put them together, and they were like a big archipelago of dots out there. Now, you can try and connect the dots if you want to. Good luck. He can't connect the dots. And understanding that, I think, obviously is important, particularly in the case of Ukraine, given the circumstances, to help its leaders make decisions and try and navigate through that.
A lot of people say that Donald Trump himself might not be the best president, but he probably has great people around him who are advising him, who are driving the actual decisions that the U.S. makes. Do you think that's true in the case of Russia and Ukraine?
It's very hard to tell. I will say, unlike the first Trump term, where the White House leaked like a sieve almost from day one, so far, less than 2 months in, but so far there really have been relatively few leaks out of this White House. How long that will continue, we don't know. But if you look at the entire range of Trump's cabinet selections and his nominations for some of the sub-cabinet positions, the quality that comes through over and over again is that he wants not loyalty from his subordinates, but fealty. He wants yes men and yes women. Qualifications, experience matter less to him than this issue of fealty, and that's very dangerous. Trump wouldn't understand this, but the function of advisors is not to try and pin the president down or try and move him in a certain direction. In the national security space, I thought my job was to make sure that Trump had all of the pertinent information in front of him and knew what the range of his options were. He was obviously going to make the decision, but the hope is through that process, he makes a better informed decision if he can choose among options and he's fully informed. If you're surrounded by sycophants, they're just going to say yes, sir, when the president speaks, and he's not going to have the benefit of that fuller scope of information.
So, having seen Trump up close in the White House, do you think that he respects the institutions of the United States government, such as its military, its intelligence services, or does he generally distrust them?
Well, I think he's very suspicious of almost all of the institutions you've just mentioned because he thinks he was persecuted for the so-called Russia collusion that occurred during the 2016 campaign. I will say, frankly, in my time at the White House, I didn't see any evidence of it. If I had, I think I would have remembered it. Uh, and I don't think there's any, again, there are plenty of conspiracy theories you can spin about what motivates Trump, but there are simpler and I think more evident explanations for it. But he distrusts this intelligence community, the law enforcement community, the military, because he thinks they were conspiring against him. And I'm very worried that over the course of 4 years, he could do considerable damage to all of those institutions. He doesn't really understand the government. He feels uncomfortable outside the West Wing. He likes to go to the tank at the Pentagon, but even walking in the corridors of the old executive office building, you get a sense he just can't wait to get back to the West Wing. It's a very limited understanding of what the capabilities are, and it's a reflection of his limited understanding, really, of what's at stake in some of the crises that we see around the world, starting with Ukraine.
So speaking of crises, let's talk about some of the ones that he's created recently. What should we make of his desire to annex Greenland and Canada? Is that to be taken seriously, or is that in jest, or is that his bargaining to begin some sort of negotiations with them?
Well, again, Trump supporters say he's a master of the art of the deal. He certainly thinks he is, and that he takes maximalist opening bargaining positions, and therefore you should understand that a lot of what he says is just for purposes of negotiation. Well, the trouble with that explanation is that it implies there's a strategy of how you get from the maximalist position to something that's acceptable, and he doesn't have that strategy, and it further doesn't take into account if everything you do is bargaining, then your friends are left uncertain really what your reliability is going to be in a crunch, and I think we're seeing that play out in the NATO alliance right now, unfortunately. Uh, if you take Canada as an example, if you bring it back to what I think is the foundation for a lot of what he says, he doesn't like former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Doesn't like him for a lot of reasons, uh, uh, and some of which have merit. But uh, in being able to troll Trudeau by calling him Governor Trudeau instead of Prime Minister Trudeau, of talking of Canada not as a NATO ally but as the 51st state, uh, he's enjoying himself denigrating Trudeau and Canada. The chances that we will actually do anything to try and annex Canada are between slim and none, because I think if he were to start down that road seriously, people would have to question his sanity, and whether he was fit anymore if he ever was to be in office. And it's as an example to show how little he thinks about the consequences of his actions. He didn't like Trudeau. Uh, he didn't like Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, as she became Deputy Prime Minister at one point during his first term. And by criticizing Trudeau and belittling him in Canada, Trump has had the remarkable effect of moving Trudeau's party under a new prime minister into a competitive position in the parliamentary elections Canada will have later this year with the Conservative Party, which has seen its support drop like a rock because of Trump's criticisms. Now, if you said from the U.S. perspective, we'd rather have the conservatives in power, Trump is achieving exactly the opposite. So Canada is just, this is not serious. Greenland is a different circumstance, although Trump's lack of understanding makes it look like it's another part of a clown show. But the U.S. has had a significant interest in Greenland for good reason for a long time. After Secretary of State William Seward bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, he negotiated with with Denmark to buy Greenland. He just wasn't able to make a deal. The U.S. did buy the Danish Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917 to guard the approaches to the Panama Canal. Roosevelt put Marines and Coast Guard on Greenland even before Pearl Harbor to help protect the North Atlantic convoy rights. Harry Truman offered $100 million for Greenland in 1947. Greenland's very important to the United States and NATO as a whole. Look at a map of the Arctic, and it's pretty clear why. And now with global warming, the potential mineral resources of Greenland are more available, and allowing China or Russia to get a position there is just not acceptable. Now, again, there are ways to deal with this, both with the Greenlanders, who are, they have a democratic government. We're not going to buy their territory from them, and with Denmark, which is also a democracy. And when you conduct negotiations like this in public, you push democratically elected leaders into corners. It's a self-defeating proposition. I think we looked at this in 2019 when Trump brought it up the first time. There are a lot of things we can do, and hopefully we can do it through a quiet negotiation and not do it under the spotlight.
So, do you think it's possible, though, that Donald Trump will forcibly try to take Greenland, or that he will somehow manage to destroy U.S. relations with Denmark in order to take Greenland? What do you think is actually realistically going to happen here? And going forward, though, how should any of these foreign leaders, whether it's the Canadians, whether it's the Danish, how should they be interpreting all that Trump is saying and doing? And what would you recommend they would react with? What should they do in response?
Well, I understand it's very frustrating to have to put up with this. All I can say is I saw it daily for 17 months, but uh, there's no prospect of American military force being applied against Greenland. Again, this would be impeachable. I think people would rise up if we sent the 82nd Airborne into Greenland. But in Trump's world, he doesn't understand how to achieve the objective that he wants, and he may have some idea that it would enhance his position in history if he could conquer Greenland, but it's not serious. It however shows an erratic, unsteady, and totally transactional presidency that has to unnerve our allies. And the best I can say is just grit your teeth. I mean, I know we've got a long time to go. We're only 2 months into this. We've got 46 more months. But people should remember Trump is an aberration. This is not a reflection of where the majority of the American people are. He wasn't elected to invade Greenland or anything else. And he himself said he wanted to end the endless wars, which he's now trying to do in unfortunately in Ukraine. So there's no quick answer here. I think people are just going to have to reconcile themselves to this kind of bizarre behavior, and as I say, try and grit our teeth so we don't do more damage than Trump himself is doing to the alliance. Which, if it breaks apart, gives Moscow a win that they were never able to achieve in the Cold War, and something that will benefit China as well, to the detriment of the West as a whole.
So, what should the NATO allies be doing at this point? If they realize that Donald Trump is doing things that are bad for the alliance and perhaps even favorable to Russia, what should they be doing to win him over?
Well, from their perspective, they need to try and find ways to work with him. It's hard to predict who will be successful. It looks, for example, like British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has so far a pretty good relationship with Trump. I wouldn't necessarily have predicted that, but it looks like it's off to a good start. Uh, Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, I think, has a good relationship. So does Viktor Orban of Hungary. That's not a pattern we'd like to see repeated. But I think leaders are going to have to think about how to flatter Trump. I mean, I'm sorry to have to say that, but that's what gets to him. So my recommendation to President Zelensky would be to do what Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, did in the first term: nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and do it quickly before somebody else thinks of it.
It's a good idea. So, let me ask you just one last question, Mr. Messer. If you were in the Oval Office today, how would you see ending the war in Ukraine? What would be the next steps?
Well, I think at this point, I wouldn't really know what to do. Trump has moved so far away from what I think are core American interests that our hope has to be that Putin makes a mistake here. So far, he has played it from Russia's point of view pretty sagely. He's just let Trump make one concession after another. He hasn't rushed to come to the bargaining table. How he addresses this proposal for a 30-day ceasefire that came out of the meeting in Jeddah between the Ukrainians and the Americans will be an interesting test. His apparent inclination is to reject the idea of a 30-day ceasefire. That could irritate Trump. Trump has flipped on leaders where he thought he had a good or a bad relationship and come out the other way. I don't think this alone would do it for Putin, but Putin, we shouldn't overestimate the enemy either. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate them, but Putin could make a mistake here, and that's what I think the allies should seize on. I think Zelensky has, by accepting the ceasefire, has gone a long way to overcoming what happened in the Oval Office. There may still be more there, but he took the ceasefire, which I can't believe he's very happy about. But he did what was necessary for Ukraine, and I think that's he's to be commended for that.
Let me ask just one follow-up question to that. So, what do you think that Donald Trump really wants to see come out of Ukraine and Russia? Is it just to have a peace at any cost, or does he have long-term plans for either?
Well, I think he wants a success for Donald Trump. And he said during the campaign that the war in Ukraine, in fact, the war in the Middle East, would never have happened if he had been president. Now, that's not a statement that's provable or disprovable. Um, Putin has agreed with him in the case of Ukraine. That's part of how Putin has manipulated Trump. Uh, Zelensky should probably do the same, but it's you have to convince Trump that if he stays in a very pro-Russian posture, which is where he is now, that will redound to his detriment. And if he can be persuaded of that, and to switching back toward the Ukrainian side, that I think it's possible, although it will be difficult, and people need to be very careful how they do it. But that would be the approach. I'd be looking for ways to take advantage of mistakes that Putin will make, or go back over the past couple of weeks and see if there are things he's said or done that can be exploited to show that he's not on board for a real peace. That we know what he really wants. He wants to conquer Ukraine and return it to be a piece of the Russian Empire. He's basically stated that goal for the past 20 years. If Trump could be convinced of that might be a step forward too.
Mr. Ambassador, that was fascinating. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for supporting Ukraine.
Well, thanks very much for having me. Good luck.